CEO millionaire catches mother caring for her twin daughters, and something incredible happens next. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and type God in the comments. A wonderful piece of news will reach you soon. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. The rain hammered against the windshield like angry fists as Jonathan Hayes gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled desperation, his 42-year-old hands trembling with more than just the cold. The merger meeting had been a catastrophe of epic proportions. 3 hours of watching his life's work crumble as investors pulled out one by one, their confidence shattered by rumors and market manipulation. Hayes Industries, the company he'd built from a single construction contract into a multi-billion-dollar empire, was hemorrhaging money faster than he could count it. The storm seemed to mirror the chaos raging inside his chest as he navigated the winding back roads of suburban Cleveland, taking the long route home to avoid the reporters who had already started gathering outside his downtown penthouse. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls from board members, lawyers, and journalists, but Jonathan had stopped answering hours ago. What was the point? By morning, the headlines would write themselves. Construction King's empire crumbles. Hayes Industries stock plummets. Billionaires fall from grace. Lightning illuminated the dark Ohio countryside in stark, dramatic flashes, and Jonathan found himself thinking about his father. Robert Hayes had died when Jonathan was 17, leaving behind nothing but debt and broken promises. "Don't be like me, son," had been his father's last coherent words from that hospital bed 25 years ago. Don't let people down. Jonathan had spent every day since then proving he was different, building something lasting, something that mattered. Now it was all falling apart, and he felt like that scared teenager again, watching everything he loved slip away. The dashboard clock read 11:47 p.m. when it happened. A deer, magnificent and terrified, leaped from the darkness like a ghost, its eyes reflecting his headlights like twin stars in the void. Jonathan's military training from his brief stint in the National Guard kicked in. Assess, react, survive. He yanked the wheel hard right, felt the Mercedes E-Class slide across the wet asphalt like a hockey puck, and heard the sickening symphony of crushing metal as the car embraced the massive oak tree that had been standing sentinel beside the road for probably a century. Steam hissed from under the crumpled hood like an angry dragon, and a sharp, burning pain shot through his left shoulder. The airbag had deployed, leaving him dizzy and disoriented, tasting blood, and wondering if this was how his story would end. Not in a boardroom battle or a blaze of glory, but wrapped around a tree on a forgotten country road. "Help! Oh my God! Is anyone hurt in there?" The voice cut through the rain, and his confusion like an angel's call. Urgent but warm, with the kind of natural compassion that couldn't be faked. Jonathan tried to push the driver's door, but it was jammed tight, the frame twisted beyond repair. Through the spider-webbed windshield, he saw a woman running toward him through the downpour, her blonde hair plastered to her head like spun gold, wearing a simple grocery store uniform that was quickly soaking through. She couldn't have been more than 25, with delicate features and the kind of natural beauty that didn't need makeup or expensive clothes to shine. There was something in her face, a determination, a fearlessness that reminded him of his mother. "Sir, can you hear me? I'm Sarah. I'm going to get you out of there. Her voice was steady and confident despite the chaos, cutting through his shock like a lifeline. She tried his door first, throwing her small frame against it with surprising strength, then quickly assessed the situation and moved to the passenger side. "This one's clear. Can you slide over toward me?" Jonathan's shoulder screamed in protest, sending lightning bolts of pain down his arm, but he managed to drag himself across the leather seats. Sarah's hands were gentle but firm as she helped him out, immediately positioning her own body to shield him from the worst of the rain. She was smaller than he'd first thought, maybe 5'4", but she moved with the confidence of someone who'd faced adversity before and won. "We need to get you checked out. I'm calling 911 right now," she said, already pulling out a phone that looked like it had seen better days, its screen cracked but functional. "No," Jonathan said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "No hospitals, please. I'm fine, just shaken up." Sarah studied his face in the glow of her phone's flashlight, her blue eyes sharp and assessing. "You're bleeding from your forehead, your shoulder looks dislocated, and you might have a concussion. You need medical attention, and you need it now." "Please, I can't deal with hospitals right now. Too many reporters, too many questions." He saw the confusion flicker across her features and made a decision that would change both their lives. "I'm Jonathan Hayes, Hayes Industries." Recognition dawned in her eyes like sunrise, but not the usual reaction he was accustomed to. No sudden greed, no calculating gleam, no immediate shift in demeanor to accommodate his wealth. Instead, her expression softened with something that looked almost like pity, and she glanced back at his destroyed Mercedes with new understanding. "The business news said your company is in trouble," she said gently, without judgment. "I heard it on the radio driving home from work." Jonathan laughed, but it came out bitter and broken. "That's the understatement of the century. By tomorrow morning I might not even have a company left. 25 years of work, thousands of employees depending on me, and I couldn't stop it from falling apart." Sarah was quiet for a moment, studying his face in the intermittent lightning, and Jonathan could see her making some kind of internal calculation. Then she squared her shoulders and made a decision that would echo through both their futures. "My house is just 2 miles up the road," she said firmly. "Let me at least clean that cut and take a look at your shoulder. Then I'll drive you wherever you need to go. But first, we're getting you out of this storm before you catch pneumonia on top of everything else." "Why would you help me? You don't even know me. For all you know, I could be dangerous." Sarah looked him in the eye with a directness that was both disarming and oddly comforting. "Because it's the right thing to do," she said simply, as if it were the most obvious answer in the world. "And because you look like you need someone to care about what happens to you." 25 minutes later, Jonathan found himself sitting in Sarah's tiny kitchen, watching her tend to his wounds with the practiced skill of someone who'd had to be a nurse, mother, and protector all at once. The house was modest to the point of being humble, barely more than a cottage, with rooms so small that his walk-in closet was probably larger. But it was clean and warm, and filled with something his mansion had never possessed. The feeling of being a home where people actually lived and loved and built memories. Children's drawings covered every surface. The refrigerator door was a riot of crayon masterpieces depicting flowers and rainbows and stick figures with enormous smiles. School awards and report cards were tacked to a bulletin board, and he could see that someone, presumably Sarah, had written encouraging notes on each one in careful handwriting. The furniture was old but well maintained, the kind of pieces that got passed down through generations or rescued from garage sales and given new life with love and elbow grease. "You have children?" he asked, wincing as she cleaned the cut on his forehead with antiseptic that smelled like his childhood. "Twin daughters, Sophie and Grace." "They're 7 years old." Sarah's voice carried that particular mixture of exhaustion and fierce love that he remembered from his own mother's voice when she talked about her kids. "They're sleeping right now, but they're usually little tornadoes of energy. They're my whole world." "Where's their father?" The question slipped out before he could stop it, and he immediately regretted the intrusion. Sarah's hands paused in their gentle ministrations, and Jonathan could see her walls go up like castle defenses. "Not in the picture. Hasn't been since before they were born. Some men aren't ready for the responsibility that comes with real love." Jonathan winced, and it wasn't from the antiseptic. He recognized that tone, the careful way she said it, the practiced deflection that came from answering the same question too many times. He'd heard it before, from his own mother, When people asked about his father during those lean years after the funeral, "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to pry." "Don't be. We're doing just fine on our own." But even as she said it, Jonathan could see the cracks in her armor, the worn spots on the furniture where the fabric had been mended multiple times. The generic brand groceries lined up on the counter with military precision, every item clearly chosen for maximum nutrition per dollar spent. The careful way she used the antiseptic, as if every drop was precious and couldn't be wasted. When she finished bandaging his shoulder with supplies from what was obviously a well-used first aid kit, Jonathan reached for his wallet, knowing what he was about to do and knowing how she would react. "Let me pay you for this, for your time, your supplies, your kindness." He pulled out several $100 bills, more money than most people saw in a month. Absolutely not. Sarah stepped back, as if he'd offered her a live snake. And there was steel in her voice now, the kind of quiet dignity that couldn't be bought or sold. "I didn't help you because I wanted something from you. Then let me help you. I can see that you're struggling, and I have more money than I know what to do with. Let me make your life easier. We're not a charity case, Mr. Hayes." Her chin lifted with pride that was both admirable and heartbreaking. "We may not have much, but we have our self-respect. We take care of ourselves." Jonathan felt something shift inside his chest, a crack in the cynical wall he'd built around his heart, over years of dealing with people who wanted something from him. When was the last time someone had refused his money? When was the last time someone had helped him without expecting anything in return? When was the last time someone had looked at him and seen a person instead of a bank account? "At least let me give you my card, my personal number." He pulled out his business card and wrote his cell phone number on the back in his careful handwriting. "If you ever need anything at all, please call me. I mean that." Sarah hesitated, her fingers hovering over the expensive embossed cardstock as if it might burn her. Finally she took it, running her thumb over the raised lettering that probably cost more than she made in a day. "I won't call," she said firmly, "but thank you for the gesture." Promise me something," Jonathan said as he stood to leave, his shoulder still aching, but his heart somehow feeling lighter than it had in months. "If things get really bad, if you're ever in real trouble, you'll reach out. Your daughters deserve every opportunity in the world, and sometimes accepting help isn't about pride. It's about love." Sarah walked him to the door, where his driver was waiting with a replacement car, having tracked him down through the GPS in his destroyed Mercedes. "You're a good man, Jonathan Hayes," she said softly. "I hope your company troubles work out. I hope you remember that your worth isn't measured by your bank account." As the car pulled away into the night, Jonathan looked back at the little house with its warm yellow light spilling from the windows like liquid gold. He'd entered that house as a desperate businessman on the verge of losing everything he'd worked for. But somehow, in helping him, Sarah had given him something he didn't even know he needed: hope. And the reminder that there were still good people in the world, people who helped strangers in the rain and asked for nothing in return. The next morning brought miracles wrapped in mundane clothing. A last-minute investor appeared, a consortium from Japan who'd been watching Hayes Industries for months, waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. The stocks rallied, the merger was not only salvaged but improved, and Hayes Industries not only survived but emerged stronger than ever. Within 6 months, Jonathan was wealthier than he'd ever been, but he never forgot the woman who had helped him on his darkest night. He kept her address in his personal safe, and he waited, hoping she would never need to use his number, but ready to move mountains if she did. 1 year and 37 days later, Sarah Mitchell stood in the pre-dawn darkness of her kitchen, staring at the final eviction notice that had been taped to her front door sometime during the night. Her hands trembled as she read the words that might as well have been a death sentence. Final notice, 7 days to vacate premises or face forcible removal. The November wind had torn one corner of the paper, and it fluttered like a white flag of surrender in the cold morning air. 7 days, 168 hours. 10,080 minutes. However she counted it, it wasn't enough time to perform the miracle she needed. Sarah had been awake since 4 a.m., unable to sleep for the third night in a row, her mind racing through calculations that never added up to anything but disaster. She'd spread all their bills across the kitchen table like tarot cards predicting doom. Rent 3 months behind. Electric bill marked final notice in angry red letters. Gas shut-off warning. Water bill climbing toward the cut-off threshold. The math was simple and brutal. Even if she worked every available hour at both her jobs for the next month, she'd still be short by almost $800. $800. Such a small amount in the grand scheme of things, but it might as well have been 8 million for all her ability to conjure it from thin air. The kitchen was cold enough that she could see her breath in little puffs of vapor. The gas had been shut off 3 days ago, which meant no heat and no hot water. Sarah had been running 2 space heaters that she'd bought second-hand, moving them from room to room and praying that the electric company would give her just a few more days before they followed through on their own threats. She opened the refrigerator, knowing what she'd find, but needing to confirm the inventory one more time. A half-gallon of milk that would expire today, some leftover macaroni and cheese from Tuesday night when she'd managed to stretch one box into 3 meals, and 2 eggs. The pantry told an even grimmer story. A sleeve of saltine crackers, 1 can of tomato soup, and a jar of peanut butter that was scraped so clean she could see her reflection in the bottom. $7.32. That's what was left in her checking account after the rent check had bounced, triggering a cascade of overdraft fees that had wiped out what little cushion she'd managed to build. Her credit cards had been maxed out months ago, their minimum payments now part of the impossible equation that kept her awake at night. Sarah heard movement from the girl's bedroom and quickly wiped her eyes, composing her face into the mask of cheerful optimism that had become her daily armor. She couldn't let Sophie and Grace see how desperate things had become. They were 7 years old. They deserved to believe that their mother could fix anything, that love was enough to keep the wolves at bay. "Mommy," Sophie's voice called out, small and sleep-rough, "it's really cold in here." "I know, sweetheart, the heater's just taking a little longer to warm up today. How about we have a cozy breakfast together and then get you both ready for school?" Sarah had become an expert at creative truth-telling, spinning their hardships into adventures that wouldn't traumatize 2 little girls who had already been through too much. When the electricity had been shut off for 2 days last month, it had become a camping trip in their own house. When they'd had to walk to school because she couldn't afford gas, it had been a nature hike through the neighborhood. When dinner was peanut butter sandwiches for the 4th night in a row, it was because they were health food enthusiasts, trying new, simple meals. The twins appeared in the kitchen doorway, identical in their blonde hair and blue eyes, but different in 1,000 small ways that only a mother would notice. Sophie was the dreamer, the artist who saw magic in everything and could turn a cardboard box into a castle. Grace was the pragmatist, the one who asked careful questions and noticed when things didn't add up quite right. "Mama, why is there a paper on our door?" Grace asked, her 7-year-old intuition picking up on details that Sarah had hoped would go unnoticed. "Just grown-up stuff, baby girl. Nothing for you to worry about. Now, who wants to help me make the most delicious breakfast we've ever had?" Tick! But as Sarah went through the motions of preparing their meager meal, her mind was elsewhere, racing through the limited options she had left. She'd already applied for 3 additional jobs, but with only a high school education and 2 children who needed her home by 6 p.m. every day, her choices were severely limited. The factory job paid minimum wage, and even with the overtime shifts that left her exhausted and hollow-eyed, it wasn't enough to cover rent, utilities, food, and the childcare costs that ate up nearly half her income. Her mother lived in Sarasota now, remarried to a retired insurance salesman named Frank, who had made his feelings about Sarah and her situation crystal clear during their one and only visit. "I didn't sign up to support someone else's mistakes," he'd told her mother, while Sarah was standing right there. Her mother had chosen Frank's comfort over her daughter's desperation, and the relationship had never recovered. Sarah's few friends were struggling just as much as she was. Jenny from work was 3 months behind on her own rent. Maria next door was working 3 jobs just to keep her head above water. There was no fairy godmother coming to save them, no rich relative to swoop in with a last-minute rescue, except, as Sarah watched her daughters eat their breakfast, 1 egg split between them, the last of the milk carefully rationed, her eyes drifted to the kitchen drawer where she kept their important papers. Buried beneath school records, medical forms, and birth certificates was a business card she'd looked at exactly 147 times over the past year. She knew the number because she'd counted, usually late at night when the fear was so overwhelming that she couldn't sleep. Jonathan Hayes. Personal cell phone number written in confident handwriting on the back. "If you're ever in real trouble," he'd said that night, standing in her doorway with rain still dripping from his expensive clothes. "Your daughters deserve every opportunity in the world." But that was a year ago, a different lifetime. Would he even remember her? Would he think she was just another person trying to take advantage of his wealth and generosity? The thought of calling him, of admitting that she'd failed to keep her family together despite all her pride and determination, made her stomach twist with humiliation so intense it was almost physical pain. That evening, after Sophie and Grace were asleep in their shared bed under every blanket they owned, Sarah sat at her small kitchen table with a pad of paper and a pen she'd borrowed from Grace's school supplies. She must have started the letter 20 times, crumpling up false starts and throwing them in the small trash can that she'd have to empty soon because they couldn't afford garbage pickup anymore. How do you ask for help when you've spent your entire adult life being proud of your independence? How do you admit that despite working 16-hour days and sacrificing everything, it still wasn't enough? How do you swallow your pride when your children's future depends on it? Finally, somewhere around midnight, the words came not from her head, but from her heart. "Dear Mr. Hayes, I doubt you remember me, but exactly 1 year and 37 days ago, you crashed your car during a terrible storm, and I helped you. You gave me your business card and told me to call if I ever needed anything. I'm writing this letter because I can't bring myself to make that phone call. The words stick in my throat every time I try. I've never asked for help before, not from anyone. I've always believed that hard work and determination were enough to build a good life for my daughters. For 6 years, I managed to keep us afloat, even when money was tight. But last month, my car broke down completely, and the repair costs wiped out what little savings I had. Without reliable transportation, I lost my weekend cleaning contracts, which were the extra income that kept us above water. Despite working 2 jobs, days at Morrison's Market and nights cleaning office buildings, I'm now facing eviction in exactly 7 days. We have no heat because the gas was shut off. Barely any food in the house and nowhere to go. I'm not asking for money for myself. I gave up caring about my own comfort a long time ago. I'm asking for my girls, Sophie and Grace Mitchell, who are 7 years old and the most beautiful, brilliant, kind-hearted children you could ever imagine. They deserve so much more than sleeping in a car or a homeless shelter. They deserve warm beds and full bellies and the chance to believe that the world is a good place where people take care of each other. Sophie wants to be an artist when she grows up. She draws pictures of our family living in a big house with a garden where she can plant flowers. Grace wants to be a teacher like Mrs. Peterson at their school because she wants to help other children learn to read. They're both on the honor roll when they're not missing school because I can't afford gas money to drive them. They're brilliant and funny, and they still believe that everything will be okay because their mommy will figure out how to fix it. But I can't fix this, Mr. Hayes. I've tried everything I can think of, applied for every assistance program, worked every available hour, sold everything we owned that had any value. I'm out of options and out of time. If you meant what you said about helping, if you remember the kindness I showed you that night when you needed someone to care, please consider helping my daughters. They didn't choose this life, and they don't deserve to suffer because of my failures as a provider. I understand if you can't or won't help. I understand if you don't even remember me. You probably meet hundreds of people, and that night might not have meant as much to you as it did to me. But I had to try, because Sophie and Grace are worth trying for. They're worth swallowing my pride and risking your rejection. If you do remember me, please know that your kindness that night gave me hope during the darkest period of my life. You reminded me that there are still good people in the world, people who care about strangers and believe in helping others. I've tried to pass that lesson on to my daughters, to teach them to be kind and generous even when we have almost nothing to give. Respectfully and desperately yours, Sarah Mitchell P.S. I still have your business card. It's in my kitchen drawer, and I've looked at it every single day for the past month, trying to find the courage to reach out. The edges are worn now from handling, but your phone number is still clear. Thank you for giving me hope, even when I was too proud to accept it. Sarah folded the letter with shaking hands, sealed it in an envelope that she'd been saving for something important, and addressed it to the personal P.O. A box that was printed on Jonathan's business card. She walked to the mailbox at the end of her street before she could lose her nerve, whispering a prayer to whatever force might be listening that this wasn't the biggest mistake of her life. 3 days later, Jonathan Hayes was in his corner office on the 52nd floor of the Hayes Industries building, reviewing quarterly reports that showed record profits, when his assistant knocked on the mahogany door that had cost more than most people's cars. "Mr. Hayes, this came to your personal P.O. box, the one you use for personal matters." Jonathan took the envelope, immediately noticing the careful handwriting that looked like it had been practiced and perfected in some long-ago penmanship class. No return address, but something about the weight of it, the quality of the paper, made his pulse quicken in a way that quarterly reports never could. He dismissed his assistant and opened the letter with hands that trembled slightly, though he couldn't have said why. As he read Sarah's words, the busy world of corporate mergers and stock prices faded away like background noise. He was back in that little kitchen a year ago, watching a woman tend to his wounds with gentle hands and ask for nothing in return. He could hear the pride in her voice when she refused his money, see the fierce love in her eyes when she spoke about her daughters, feel the warmth of a home where people actually cared about each other. She'd finally reached out. After a year of silence, she'd swallowed her pride and asked for help. But even as his heart responded to her words, Jonathan's business mind kicked in with the skepticism that had kept him alive in a world full of sharks and predators. In his world, he'd been the target of countless scams, elaborate schemes designed to separate him from his money. Sob stories with just enough truth to be convincing, fake families in crisis, professional con artists who could make themselves cry on command. The letter was almost too perfect, too heartbreaking. What if someone had researched that night, found out about Sarah's story, and was using it to manipulate him? What if this wasn't really from the woman who had helped him, but from someone who had heard the story second-hand and decided to exploit it? What if it wasn't really from her at all? Jonathan stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the Cleveland skyline, wrestling with doubt and hope in equal measure. He'd built his fortune by being smart, cautious, and appropriately skeptical of people's motives. But he'd also learned that night a year ago that sometimes the most important decisions couldn't be made with spreadsheets and risk assessments. Sometimes you had to trust your heart, even when your head was screaming warnings. He picked up his secure phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. "Marcus, it's Jonathan. I need you to check something out for me, discreetly." "What kind of something?" "A woman named Sarah Mitchell, 2407 Maple Street. I need to know if she's real, if her situation is genuine, if this is legitimate, or if I'm about to be taken for the most expensive ride of my life." 2 days later, Marcus Delacroix called back with his report, his voice carrying the careful neutrality that Jonathan had come to associate with news that was either very good or very bad. Marcus was the best private investigator money could buy, a former FBI agent who'd made a career out of separating truth from fiction in a world where both were often for sale. "The letter is 100% legitimate, Mr. Hayes. Sarah Mitchell, 2407 Maple Street, exactly as she described. Single mother, 25 years old, 2 daughters born Sophie Rose and Grace Elizabeth Mitchell on March 15th, 7 years ago. Works days at Morrison's Market in the checkout department, nights cleaning office buildings for citywide maintenance services. Behind 3 months on rent, gas utilities shut off 5 days ago, electric company final notice posted yesterday." Jonathan felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. "And her background? Clean as a whistle. No criminal record, no history of scams or fraud, no gambling debts or drug problems. High school graduate, honor roll student, worked her way through 2 years of community college before the pregnancy forced her to drop out. Previous employer references describe her as reliable, honest, and hard-working. School records for the children show them as exceptional students when attendance allows. They've missed 17 days this semester due to what the school calls transportation issues. What about the father? Tyler Morrison, son of the grocery store owner where she works. Got her pregnant during her first year of community college, promised to marry her, then disappeared when she was 6 months along. Family money apparently bought his way into a 4-year university in California, and he's never had any contact with the children. No child support, no acknowledgement of paternity, nothing. Jonathan's hands clenched involuntarily. The daughters, Sophie and Grace, 7 years old as stated, honor roll students when they're in school consistently. Teachers describe them as bright, well-behaved children who are obviously well-loved despite their circumstances. The school counselor noted that they've missed 8 days this semester due to transportation issues after their mother's car broke down last month. But they're still maintaining excellent grades. They've been observed sharing their free lunch with other children who don't qualify for the program. Jesus. Jonathan closed his eyes, remembering his own childhood, the times when his mother had to choose between heating the apartment and buying groceries. What else? The eviction is real. Sheriff's Department has it scheduled for next Tuesday at 9 a.m. After that, they'll have nowhere to go. The local women's shelter has a 6-month waiting list, and temporary housing assistance has been cut due to budget constraints. Mr. Hayes, if you don't mind me saying so, this woman is exactly who she claims to be, and she's in exactly the kind of trouble that doesn't have a happy ending without intervention. Jonathan stared out at the city below, watching people move through their lives like ants in a carefully constructed colony. Somewhere out there, less than 30 miles away, a woman who had saved his life was watching her own world collapse around her children. "Marcus, I'm going to go see her." But I want to observe the situation first, make sure I understand what I'm dealing with before I commit to anything. You want me to set up surveillance? No, I'll go myself. Tonight. I need to see this with my own eyes. Sir, with respect, you're worth about $3 billion. Going into that neighborhood alone at night might not be the wisest. I'll be careful, and Marcus, not a word of this to anyone, not my assistant, not my security team, not my board. This stays between us. That evening, Jonathan Hayes found himself doing something he'd never done in his 43 years of life, sitting in a rental Honda Civic, wearing clothes he'd bought at a Goodwill store, with a fake beard that itched like hell and made him feel like a character in a bad spy movie. He'd never gone undercover before, never needed to disguise himself to observe anything. His world was one of boardrooms and country clubs where everyone knew who he was and treated him accordingly. But this was different. This was about seeing Sarah's truth without the filter of his wealth and status affecting her behavior. The address led him to a neighborhood that existed in a different Cleveland than the one he knew. Small houses pressed close together like old friends sharing secrets, some well-maintained with flower boxes and fresh paint, others showing the strain of too many bills and not enough money. Sarah's house sat somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, clean and obviously cared for, but clearly struggling against the tide of poverty that threatened to pull it under. The paint was peeling in places where moisture had gotten under the eaves, and the front porch sagged slightly on one side, like an old man favoring a bad knee. But the small front yard was neatly kept, and someone had planted mums in old coffee cans that flanked the front steps, adding spots of orange and gold that caught the streetlight. It was nearly 6 o'clock on a Thursday evening when Jonathan positioned himself across the street, partially hidden by a large oak tree that was probably older than the neighborhood itself. He felt like a stalker, like some kind of perverted voyeur, but he couldn't risk walking up to the door only to find out this was an elaborate setup designed to part him from his money. What he saw in the next hour broke his heart into pieces so small he wondered if it could ever be repaired. First, Sarah came home from what was obviously her day job, her Morrison's Market uniform wrinkled and stained, her blonde hair escaping from a ponytail that had probably started the day neat and tidy. She moved like someone carrying an invisible weight that pressed down on her shoulders, each step careful and measured, as if she was conserving energy for battles yet to come. Jonathan watched her check the mailbox, empty, and then saw her face fall as she noticed the eviction notice that had been taped to her door sometime during the day. Even from 50 yards away, he could see her body deflate like a balloon losing air, her hand going to her mouth as if to hold back a sob that might wake the neighbors. She stood there for almost a full minute, reading and rereading the notice as if the words might change if she stared at them long enough. 15 minutes later, a yellow school bus wheezed to a stop in front of the house, and 2 little girls bounded down the steps like puppies released from a kennel. They were unmistakably twins, with long blonde hair that caught the late afternoon sun, and their mother's delicate features rendered in miniature. But where Sarah looked defeated and exhausted, Sophie and Grace radiated the irrepressible energy of childhood, the kind of joy that exists independent of circumstances. Jonathan watched them race to their mother, wrapping their small arms around her waist with the fierce affection that only children can manage, and saw Sarah's face transform completely. The exhaustion didn't disappear, but it was suddenly overshadowed by a love so powerful and consuming that it was visible from across the street. Her hands smoothed their hair, her voice carried on the evening air as she asked about their day, and for a moment she looked like any other mother welcoming her children home. As the evening wore on, Jonathan noticed details that Marcus's professional report hadn't captured, small things that painted a picture of quiet desperation wrapped in determined normalcy. The way Sarah's breath fogged in the air, even when she was inside the house, visible through the thin curtains that provided the only privacy from prying eyes. The single lamp that moved from room to room, providing light wherever the family gathered. The shadows behind windows that suggested a home furnished with love and creativity rather than money. Around 7:30, something happened that made Jonathan question everything he thought he knew about poverty and desperation and the lengths a mother would go to protect her children's innocence. Sarah opened the front door and called to her daughters, who were playing some elaborate game in the small backyard despite the November cold. "Girls, bath time! Come on in and get warm!" Jonathan watched, curious despite himself, as Sarah disappeared into the house for several minutes. When she emerged, she was carrying what looked like a large plastic basin, the kind used for washing dishes or doing laundry by hand, along with several towels and what appeared to be a large metal pitcher. The twins came running, their cheeks flushed red from the cold air, their voices carrying on the wind as they chattered excitedly about their day at school. "And then Mrs. Peterson said my story about the dragon was the best one in the whole class. That's because you made the dragon nice instead of scary. Well, all dragons should be nice. Mean dragons are just dragons that nobody ever loved." Sarah set the basin down on the small back porch and went back inside, returning with a large pot that steamed in the cold air. Jonathan's stomach dropped as he realized what he was witnessing. She was preparing to give her daughters a bath outside in a plastic basin because they had no hot water in the house. But that wasn't the part that destroyed him. The part that destroyed him was watching Sarah transform this moment of absolute desperation into something that felt like magic. She was smiling, laughing with her daughters, making jokes about pioneer baths and camping adventures and what the settlers did when they were traveling west to find their fortunes. Okay, my brave pioneer daughters," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly in the still evening air, warm and playful despite the circumstances. "Let me show you how the settlers used to stay clean when they were traveling in covered wagons and didn't have fancy bathrooms." She had the girls step into the basin, fully clothed. Jonathan realized with relief this was clearly just a demonstration of the process they'd follow later, and began showing them how to use the warm water efficiently, how to soap up quickly and rinse thoroughly with minimal waste. "The trick," Sarah said, her teeth chattering slightly, but her voice never wavering, "is to be fast and thorough. You get in, you get clean, and you get out before you get too cold. And remember the most important rule. Save the cleanest water for last." The twins chorused in unison, clearly having heard this lesson before, treating it like a fun game rather than a harsh lesson in survival. Jonathan watched Sarah's hands shake as she demonstrated the process, watched her try to hide her own discomfort as the cold November air cut through her thin work clothes. But her voice never faltered, her smile never slipped. She was giving her daughters a masterclass in resilience while trying to preserve their innocence, showing them how to survive hardship while making them believe they were learning valuable pioneer skills. When one of the space heaters visible through the window suddenly went dark, Sarah didn't panic or curse. Instead, she clapped her hands together and announced that they were going to have the most cozy evening ever, with blankets and stories and hot cocoa made with the last of their milk. "Mommy," Sophie's small voice carried clearly in the still air, "is it normal for the water to be this cold? My friend Emma says her bath water is always warm." "Well, sweetheart," Sarah replied with gentle patience, "pioneer children always had to be brave about cold water. That's how they grew up to be strong and resilient. Like us, Mummy?" Grace asked. "Exactly like you, my brave little pioneers." It was the most heartbreaking and beautiful thing Jonathan had ever witnessed. As Sarah helped the girls out of the basin and hurried them inside to get warm and change into pajamas, Jonathan sat in his rental car with tears streaming down his face, his fake beard damp with emotions he hadn't felt since he was a child, watching his own mother perform similar miracles with love and determination. This wasn't a scam. This wasn't someone trying to take advantage of his wealth or manipulate his emotions for financial gain. This was a mother sacrificing everything, her pride, her comfort, her dignity, to protect her children from the harsh reality of their situation. This was love in its purest form, the kind of fierce, protective love that would walk through fire to keep two little girls believing that the world was safe and good. This was the woman who had helped him when he was broken and bleeding, who had asked for nothing in return, who had kept his business card for a year before finally finding the courage to ask for help. And when she did ask, it wasn't for herself. It was for Sophie and Grace, two 7-year-old girls who deserved every opportunity in the world. Jonathan pulled out his phone with hands that shook almost as badly as Sarah's had been and dialed her number before he could lose his nerve or let his business instincts talk him out of what his heart knew was right. The phone rang 3 times, each ring seeming to echo in the cold night air, before her voice answered, cautious and tired, and thread with the kind of hope that was afraid to hope too much. "Hello? Sarah? This is Jonathan Hayes. I got your letter." The silence on the other end stretched so long that Jonathan wondered if the call had dropped, if she'd hung up, if he'd somehow misdialed. Then he heard a shaky intake of breath, followed by a whispered, "Oh my God," that sounded like a prayer. "Mr. Hayes, I didn't think you'd actually. I hoped, but I didn't dare. I'm coming over. Right now. We need to talk." "Oh no, please, you don't need to come here. The house is such a mess, and the girls are in their pajamas, and I look terrible, and—" "Sarah." Jonathan's voice was gentle but firm, cutting through her panic with the kind of calm authority that had served him well in boardrooms and crisis situations. "I'm already here. I'm across the street. I've been watching and I've seen enough. I'm coming to your door now, and we're going to figure this out. Together." He hung up the phone, stripped off the ridiculous fake beard, and walked across the street toward the woman who had saved his life and was about to let him save hers in return. Jonathan's heart hammered against his ribs as he approached Sarah's front door, each step feeling simultaneously too fast and too slow. The eviction notice fluttered in the evening breeze like a white flag of surrender, and he could see Sarah's silhouette through the thin curtains, pacing back and forth in what appeared to be panic. When she opened the door, the difference between the woman he remembered and the one standing before him was stark enough to steal his breath. Sarah had lost at least 20 pounds she couldn't afford to lose, her cheekbones sharp beneath skin that looked almost translucent. Her blonde hair, which he remembered as lustrous and healthy, now hung limp and lifeless around her shoulders. But her eyes, those incredible blue eyes, still held the same warmth and dignity that had captivated him a year ago. "Mr. Hayes, this is so embarrassing. You shouldn't have come here. You shouldn't see us like this." "Like what? Like a family that's struggling? Like people who need help?" Jonathan stepped closer, and Sarah backed away instinctively, her arms wrapping around herself in a gesture of self-protection. "Sarah, there's nothing embarrassing about needing help. What's embarrassing is that I waited this long to respond to your letter." The interior of the house was worse than he'd imagined from his surveillance position across the street. The temperature couldn't have been more than 50 degrees, and he could see his breath in small puffs as he spoke. A single space heater glowed in the corner of the living room, surrounded by blankets and pillows, where the family clearly spent most of their time trying to stay warm. "Mommy, who's the man?" A small voice piped up from the makeshift nest of blankets, and Jonathan saw 2 pairs of identical blue eyes peering at him with curiosity rather than fear. "Girls, this is Mr. Hayes. He's a friend of Mommy's from work." Sarah's voice carried a tremor that suggested she was struggling to maintain her composure. "Mr. Hayes, these are my daughters, Sophie and Grace." Jonathan knelt down to their level, his expensive suit immediately picking up dirt from the worn carpet. Up close, the twins were even more beautiful than he'd observed from across the street, but he could see the subtle signs of malnutrition that no amount of love could disguise. Their faces were slightly gaunt, their blonde hair lacking the shine of properly nourished children. "It's very nice to meet you both," he said gently. "Your mommy has told me wonderful things about you." "Are you the one who's going to help us not have to move?" Grace asked, with the directness that only children possess. Sarah's face went pale, and she quickly intervened. "Grace, honey, we don't talk about grown-up things with guests. Why don't you and Sophie go play in your room for a few minutes while Mommy talks to Mr. Hayes?" "But it's cold in there, and all our toys are here by the heater," Sophie protested logically. Jonathan felt something break inside his chest as he realized that this one room, heated by a single space heater, had become their entire living space. "Actually, I was hoping the girls could stay. I'd like to get to know them better." For the next 20 minutes, Jonathan sat on the floor with Sophie and Grace, marveling at their resilience and creativity. Despite their circumstances, they were bright, articulate children who had turned cardboard boxes into elaborate dollhouses and used crayons worn down to nubs to create artwork that covered every available surface. "This is our dream house," Sophie explained, showing him a drawing of a large house with a garden. "Mummy says someday we'll live somewhere with flowers and a swing set." "And hot water," Grace added matter-of-factly, "so we don't have to take baths outside when it's cold." Sarah's face flushed with shame, but Jonathan felt only admiration for the woman who had managed to keep her children's spirits alive in the face of such overwhelming hardship. "Girls," Sarah said finally, "I need to talk to Mr. Hayes privately for a few minutes. Can you go to your room and put on your warmest pajamas? I'll bring the heater in soon." When the twins had reluctantly retreated to their bedroom, Sarah collapsed onto the worn couch as if her legs could no longer support her weight. "This is my worst nightmare," she whispered. "Having someone see us like this. Having you see us like this." "Sarah, look at me." Jonathan moved to sit beside her, careful not to crowd her, but close enough that she could see the sincerity in his eyes. "What I see is a mother who has sacrificed everything for her children. What I see is a woman who has turned poverty into adventure, desperation into creativity, hardship into love. What I see is the same person who saved my life a year ago. I haven't saved anything. I'm failing them every day. They should be in warm beds, eating proper meals, playing with toys that aren't made from garbage. Instead, they're learning to bathe in a plastic tub because their mother can't afford to keep the gas turned on. How much do you need?" The question hung in the air between them, like a bridge that could either connect or divide them forever. "I can't take your money," Sarah said automatically, but her voice lacked the conviction it had carried a year ago. "You're not taking anything I'm offering. There's a difference." Jonathan pulled out his phone and opened his banking app. "Rent, utilities, food, medical care. Give me numbers." Sarah stared at him for a long moment, and he could see the war raging behind her eyes. Pride versus desperation. Independence versus her children's welfare. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she began to speak. "Rent is $1,200 a month. I'm 3 months behind, so $3,600 plus late fees brings it to $4,200. Gas bill is $800 to reconnect and clear the balance. Electric is threatening shutoff. That's another $600. Water bill is current, but barely. Food." She stopped, her voice breaking. "Food. I haven't been able to buy groceries in 2 weeks. We've been living on free lunch at school and whatever I can find in the break room at work. The girls don't know. They think we're on a special diet." Jonathan's hands were shaking as he transferred $50,000 into Sarah's checking account. That should cover immediate expenses and give you a cushion for the next few months. Sarah looked at her phone as the notification came through, and her face went white. $50,000? Jonathan, I can't. This is too much. I could never pay you back. You saved my life. You think I could ever put a price on that? But before Sarah could respond, a sharp knock at the front door made them both freeze. Through the thin walls, they could hear a man's voice, loud and aggressive. Sarah Mitchell, I know you're in there. You've got 5 minutes to come out here and talk to me or I'm calling the cops. Sarah's face went from pale to ghostly white. Oh, God. That's Tyler. That's their father. I thought you said he wasn't in the picture. He's not. He hasn't been for 7 years. But for the past week, he's been driving by the house, watching us. He noticed the heat was back on, saw the lights in every room, watched me bring in grocery bags. He thinks I'm running some kind of scam on wealthy men, and he wants his cut. The pounding on the door intensified, followed by Tyler's voice again, slurred now with what was obviously alcohol. I know there's a rich guy in there. My mom saw him go in. You better not be trying to cut me out of this deal, Sarah. Jonathan stood up, his face hardening with a protective anger he hadn't felt since his military days. Stay here with the girls. I'll handle this. No, you don't understand. Tyler can be dangerous when he's been drinking. He's never hurt the girls, but he's threatened me before. All the more reason for me to deal with this now. Jonathan opened the front door to find a man who looked like a warning poster about the dangers of alcohol and poor life choices. Tyler Morrison was probably handsome once, but years of drinking and resentment had left him bloated and red-faced, with the kind of aggression that came from knowing he'd wasted his potential. So you're the sucker, Tyler sneered, swaying slightly on his feet. Rich boy thinks he's going to play hero to my baby mama and her brats. Those brats are your daughters, Jonathan said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of controlled menace that had served him well in hostile business negotiations. And I suggest you lower your voice before you wake them up. My daughters? Hell no. I never wanted those kids, never even signed the birth certificates. Sarah trapped me with this pregnancy bullshit, but I was smart enough to get out before she could ruin my life completely. Behind Jonathan, he heard Sarah make a small, wounded sound, and his protective instincts flared white-hot. You need to leave now. I'm not going anywhere until I get what's coming to me. I've been watching this place for days. Heat's back on, lights in every room, new groceries. That makes me entitled to half, since those are my kids you're supporting. They're not your kids. You just said so yourself. You abandoned them before they were born. Tyler's face flushed an even deeper red. Look, rich boy, I don't know what kind of game Sarah's running on you, but she's been pulling this sob story for years. Poor single mother, struggling to make ends meet. It's all an act to get sympathy money from suckers like you. The only sucker I see here is a man who had everything handed to him and threw it all away. Jonathan stepped closer, and despite being smaller than Tyler, there was something in his bearing that made the other man take a step back. You had a college education paid for, a family business waiting for you, and a chance to be part of Sophie and Grace's lives. But you chose drugs and alcohol over responsibility. Those kids aren't special. They're just another mouth to feed, another expense I was smart enough to avoid. That was the moment when something inside Jonathan snapped completely. The confrontation might have turned physical if Sophie's small voice hadn't cut through the tension like a knife through silk. Mommy, why is the angry man yelling? Both men turned to see the twins standing in the doorway, their faces pale with confusion and fear. Sarah immediately moved to shield them, but the damage was done. They had heard Tyler's cruel words about not wanting them, about them being just another expense. You see what you've done? Sarah's voice was fierce with maternal rage. You've upset them. After 7 years of staying away, this is how you choose to come back into their lives. Odin. Tyler looked at the children as if seeing them for the first time, and for a moment, something that might have been regret flickered across his features. But it was quickly replaced by defensive anger. This isn't over, Sarah. You think you can just replace me with some rich asshole and pretend I don't exist? I've got rights. You signed away any rights you had when you walked away, Jonathan said coldly. And if you ever come near this family again, you'll discover exactly how much influence a rich asshole can have with the local police department. After Tyler stumbled away, muttering threats and curses, Jonathan helped Sarah get the girls settled back into their blanket nest. But the damage had been done. Sophie was crying quietly, and Grace was asking difficult questions about the angry man and why he said he didn't want them. "Mommy, was that really our daddy?" Grace asked, her 7-year-old mind trying to process concepts that would be difficult for adults. Sarah knelt down to their level, her hands trembling as she smoothed their hair. "Yes, sweetheart. That was Tyler. But remember what we've talked about. Biology doesn't make someone a parent. Love makes someone a parent." But why doesn't he love us?" Sophie whispered, her voice breaking. "Are we bad kids?" "No, baby girl. You are the most wonderful, beautiful, perfect children in the world. Sometimes adults make choices that have nothing to do with the children involved. Tyler's choice to leave had nothing to do with you, and everything to do with him not being ready to be the kind of father you deserved." Jonathan watched this interaction with growing fury, not at Sarah or the children, but at Tyler and the system that allowed a man to abandon his responsibilities without consequences. But beneath the anger was something else, a growing certainty about what he needed to do. "Girls," he said gently, "what would you think about having a new daddy? Someone who would love you and take care of you and never, ever make you feel unwanted." The twins looked at him with identical expressions of hope mixed with caution. "Would you be our new daddy?" Sophie asked with the directness that children possess. "Would you want me to be?" "Yes," they said in unison, and Jonathan felt his heart swell with an emotion he'd never experienced before. But Sarah was shaking her head, her face pale with panic. "Jonathan, you can't just. This isn't how things work. You can't just decide to be someone's father because you feel sorry for them." "I don't feel sorry for them. I feel privileged to be considered for the position." Jonathan turned to face her fully. "Sarah, I've spent 43 years building a business empire, accumulating wealth and power and influence, but I've never built a family. I've never had anyone who depended on me for more than a paycheck. I've never had anyone who loved me just because I existed." "You don't understand what you're saying. Children aren't a business acquisition. They're a lifetime commitment. They're homework help and scraped knees and teenage drama and college tuition and bedtime stories and Christmas mornings and proud moments at school, plays, and teaching them to ride bikes and walking them down the aisle someday." Jonathan's voice was soft but certain. "Sarah, I know exactly what I'm saying. The question is whether you're willing to let me prove it." Over the next 3 days, Jonathan threw himself into learning everything he could about being a father to 7-year-old twins. He hired the best family attorney in Cleveland to research adoption procedures, consulted with child psychologists about the best way to transition into a parental role, and had extensive background checks run on himself to ensure there would be no legal obstacles. But the real education came from spending time with Sophie and Grace themselves. On Saturday morning, he arrived at their house with groceries, new winter coats for the girls, and a team of repair technicians to restore their heat and hot water. He insisted on helping prepare breakfast, and discovered that making pancakes for 2 excited 7-year-olds was more challenging and more rewarding than negotiating billion-dollar mergers. "Mr. Jonathan," Sophie said, syrup on her chin and joy in her eyes, "these are the best pancakes ever." "That's because we made them together," he replied, surprised by how much truth was in that simple statement. But it was Sunday evening when the real test came. Jonathan was reading bedtime stories to the girls when Grace looked up at him with serious blue eyes and asked the question that changed everything. "Mr. Jonathan, if you become our daddy, will you promise never to leave like Tyler did?" The weight of that question, the trust and vulnerability in her voice, hit Jonathan like a physical blow. This wasn't about money or business success or proving anything to anyone. This was about two little girls who had been abandoned by their biological father and were brave enough to risk their hearts again. "Grace, Sophie," he said, setting down the storybook and taking their small hands in his, "I want to make you a promise. But before I do, I need you to understand what promises mean. A promise isn't something you say when it's easy. A promise is something you keep when it's hard. A promise means that even when you're angry or sad or frustrated, you remember what you said and you honor it." The twins nodded solemnly, sensing the importance of the moment. "I promise that if I become your daddy, if your mommy says yes, and if you both want me to, I will never, ever leave you. Not when you're sick, not when you make mistakes, not when you're teenagers and think you hate me. I will be there for every scraped knee, every broken heart, every triumph and every disappointment. I will love you both exactly as much when you're 40 as I do right now. That's my promise to you." Both girls threw their arms around him, and Jonathan felt tears on his cheeks that had nothing to do with sadness and everything to do with the overwhelming realization that he had found his purpose. The next morning, he found Sarah sitting at her kitchen table, staring at a stack of legal documents. "What are those?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew. "Custody papers. Tyler filed them yesterday. He's claiming that you're an unfit influence on the children because you're attempting to buy parental rights, and that he wants joint custody." Her voice was hollow with despair. "His lawyer says that because he's the biological father, he has rights regardless of the fact that he's been absent for 7 years. Jonathan felt cold fury wash over him. "He's doing this for money." "Of course he is. He found out about the deposit you made, and now he thinks there's more where that came from. He doesn't want the girls. He wants leverage over us." "Let him try." Jonathan's voice was deadly quiet. "I have the best legal team money can buy, and Tyler Morrison is about to discover what happens when you threaten my family." "Your family?" "Yes, my family, if you'll have me." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, her blue eyes searching his face for any sign of insincerity or hidden agenda. Finally, she spoke. "Jonathan, you've known us for less than a week. You can't possibly understand what you're committing to. I understand that I love you, all three of you. I understand that I want to wake up every morning knowing that Sophie and Grace are safe and loved and that their future is secure. I understand that I want to be the man who teaches them that not all men abandon the people they're supposed to protect. And what about me? What about us?" Jonathan reached across the table and took her hands in his. "Sarah, I fell in love with you the night you pulled me out of that car. I fell in love with your kindness, your strength, your refusal to accept money for doing the right thing. This week has just confirmed what I already knew, that you're the woman I want to spend the rest of my life loving." But before Sarah could respond, Jonathan's phone rang. The caller ID showed his lawyer's name, and something in the man's tone when Jonathan answered made his blood run cold. "Jonathan, we have a problem. Tyler Morrison's lawyer just filed an emergency motion claiming that you're attempting to coerce Sarah Mitchell into a relationship through financial manipulation. They're asking for immediate removal of the children from the home pending a full investigation." "What does that mean?" "It means that if the judge grants the motion, Sophie and Grace could be placed in foster care while this gets sorted out. I've managed to get the hearing scheduled for next Friday morning at 9 a.m. That gives us a week to prepare our defense." Jonathan felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Everything he'd found, everything he'd fought for, was about to be ripped away by a man who wanted nothing more than to profit from the pain of innocence. "Then we'd better make sure we're ready for war." The Cleveland family court building had never felt more intimidating than it did on that Friday morning, as Jonathan, Sarah, and their legal team prepared for the battle that would determine the future of their family. They had spent the week preparing meticulously, gathering character witnesses, financial records, and expert testimony. Jonathan had assembled the finest legal minds money could buy, but Tyler Morrison's lawyer was making arguments that struck at the heart of every judge's protective instincts regarding children. "Your Honor," Tyler's attorney argued, "my client may have been absent from these children's lives, but that doesn't negate his biological rights as their father. We're asking the court to consider whether Mr. Hayes' sudden interest in this family is genuinely motivated by love or by something more predatory in nature." Judge Patricia Hendricks was a stern woman in her 60s who had built her career on protecting children from adults who would exploit them. Jonathan could see her weighing every word, every gesture, looking for any sign that this was indeed some kind of elaborate manipulation. "Mr. Hayes," the judge said directly, "you've known this family for less than 2 weeks, yet you're proposing to adopt children you barely know. Help me understand your motivations." Jonathan stood, knowing that everything depended on his answer being both truthful and convincing. "Your Honor, 13 months ago, Sarah Mitchell saved my life. Not just from a car accident, but from a much deeper crisis. She showed me what real kindness looked like, what genuine goodness was. When she reached out to me for help, I discovered that helping her family wasn't an obligation. It was a privilege." He paused, looking directly at Sophie and Grace, who were sitting with a court-appointed advocate in the front row, their small faces pale with confusion and fear. "I'm not trying to buy a family, Your Honor. I'm trying to deserve one. Sophie and Grace have taught me more about love in 2 weeks than I learned in 43 years of life. They've shown me what it means to have someone depend on you, not for what you can provide, but for who you are as a person." Tyler's lawyer stood up immediately. "Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of emotional manipulation we're concerned about. Mr. Hayes is a billionaire who can promise these children anything. How can we be sure his motivations are pure?" But Judge Hendricks held up her hand for silence. "Before we continue, I'd like to hear from the children themselves. Sophie and Grace, would you like to tell me how you feel about Mr. Hayes?" Sophie, brave despite her fear, stood up on her chair so she could see over the court barrier. "Your Honor, Mr. Jonathan makes the best pancakes, and he reads us stories, and he promised he would never leave us like some people do." Grace, always more cautious, added, "He makes Mommy smile again. She hasn't smiled like that since forever." "And how do you feel about Tyler Morrison?" The twins exchanged glances, and Grace spoke with the careful honesty that only children possess. "He's scary. He yells at Mommy and says mean things about us. We don't want him to be our daddy." Tyler's lawyer tried to object, but Judge Hendricks silenced him with a look that could have frozen fire. "Mr. Morrison," the judge said, "you've been absent from these children's lives for 7 years. What exactly are you hoping to accomplish with this custody petition?" Tyler stood up, swaying slightly, and Jonathan realized with alarm that the man had been drinking even before the hearing. "I want what's best for my kids, Your Honor. I don't think it's right for some stranger to come in and try to buy his way into their lives. And what role do you envision playing in their future?" "Well, I mean they should know their real father. They should know where they come from. Mr. Morrison, have you ever paid child support for Sophie and Grace?" No, but..." Have you ever sent birthday cards, Christmas presents, or made any attempt to contact them in 7 years? I was figuring things out, trying to get my life together. Are you currently employed? Tyler's silence spoke volumes. Judge Hendricks turned to Sarah, her expression softening slightly. Ms. Mitchell, you've been raising these children alone for 7 years. What do you want for their future? Sarah stood, her voice clear and strong despite the tremor in her hands. I want them to be safe, loved, and secure. I want them to have a father who chooses to be their father every day, not someone who shows up when it's convenient or profitable. And Mr. Hayes provides that. Jonathan has shown more care and commitment to my daughters in 2 weeks than their biological father showed in their entire lives. He's not trying to replace anyone. He's trying to be what they've never had. The judge was quiet for several long minutes, reviewing the documents in front of her. Finally, she looked up, her decision clear in her expression. Mr. Morrison, your petition for emergency custody is denied. Furthermore, unless you can demonstrate significant life changes, including stable employment, sobriety, and genuine commitment to these children's welfare, I see no basis for any custody arrangement. Tyler's face turned red with rage. This is bullshit. You can't just let some rich bastard buy my kids. Bailiff, please escort Mr. Morrison from my courtroom. If he returns without addressing his substance abuse issues and making genuine efforts toward stability, I'll hold him in contempt. As Tyler was led away, still shouting threats and accusations, Judge Hendricks turned to Jonathan and Sarah. However, I also have concerns about moving too quickly with adoption proceedings. Mr. Hayes, I'm ordering a 6-month supervised transition period. You'll work with family services to demonstrate your commitment and compatibility with this family. If, at the end of that period, everyone still wants to proceed, we'll revisit the adoption. Jonathan felt relief wash over him like warm water. 6 months wasn't immediate, but it was hope. But the real victory came 3 hours later when they were back in Sarah's house, now properly heated and filled with groceries, and the twins were playing with new toys that Jonathan had brought them. So, Sarah said, sitting beside him on the couch that had been replaced with something comfortable and warm. 6 months to prove you're serious about this. 6 months to prove I'm worthy of being their father, Jonathan corrected. Sarah, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have said from the beginning. She looked at him with raised eyebrows, and he took a deep breath. I didn't just fall in love with Sophie and Grace. I fell in love with their mother. I fell in love with the woman who risked everything to help a stranger, who turned poverty into adventure, who raised 2 incredible children with nothing but love and determination. Jonathan. Oh, I know it's fast. I know it seems impossible. But Sarah Mitchell, would you consider marrying me? Not for the girl's sake, not for financial security, but because I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it? Sarah was quiet for so long that Jonathan began to panic. Then she smiled, the first real unguarded smile he'd seen from her, and nodded. Yes, but I have conditions. Anything. First, we do this right. Proper courtship, engagement, wedding planning. I want Sophie and Grace to see what love looks like when it's built on respect and commitment. Agreed. Second, I keep working. I don't want to be someone who's rescued from poverty. I want to be a partner who contributes to our family's success. I was hoping you'd say that. How do you feel about running the charitable foundation I'm setting up? And third, Sarah's voice became serious. If you ever change your mind, if this becomes too much, if you decide you made a mistake, you tell me honestly. You don't disappear. You don't abandon us without explanation. Jonathan cupped her face in his hands, looking directly into her eyes. Sarah, I will never change my mind about loving you. I will never change my mind about wanting to be Sophie and Grace's father. This isn't a trial run or an experiment. This is forever. 6 months later, on a warm May afternoon in the garden of their new home, Jonathan Hayes married Sarah Mitchell in front of 200 guests and 2 very excited flower girls. The house had been chosen specifically for its large backyard, where Sophie could plant the flowers she'd always dreamed of, and Grace could have space to practice the soccer skills that her new father was teaching her. Tyler Morrison was notably absent, having failed to complete his court-ordered rehabilitation program and lost his legal right to any contact with the children. During the ceremony, when the minister asked if anyone objected to the union, 7-year-old Sophie stood up and announced, "We object to waiting any longer. We want Mr. Jonathan to be our daddy right now." The laughter that followed was warm and genuine, and as Jonathan kissed his new wife and hugged his new daughters, he realized that sometimes the best business deals are the ones that have nothing to do with business at all. 1 year later, Hayes Industries announced the creation of the Mitchell Foundation, dedicated to helping single mothers and children in crisis. Sarah Mitchell Hayes served as its director, and their first initiative was a program providing emergency assistance to families facing eviction. And every night before bed, Jonathan would tell Sophie and Grace the story of how their mommy saved a stranger in the rain, and how that stranger turned out to be exactly the daddy they'd been waiting for all along. The twins would always end the story the same way, and they all lived happily ever after, because sometimes the best families are the ones you choose. They were right.